What's up, YouTube? KS Gun Guy here to talk about a couple of great concealed carry options for you. Thanks for joining me today. But I want to compare a couple of guns, the Glock 26 and the Smith & Wesson 9C. Now, those of you who are familiar with the two brands, Glock and Smith & Wesson, know that their sizes are to some degree comparable between the Smiths and the Glocks, but a couple that aren't 100% comparable, and specifically these two guns here. The reason I say that is the Smith & Wesson 9C kind of falls in between a couple of the Glocks. The Glock 26, which Glock calls a subcompact gun, and the Glock 19, which is a compact gun. And I might wheel in the Glock 19 just for a moment to compare a little bit. But I still consider these comparable guns, and what I look for to compare guns largely is round count. What I mean by round count is if a gun is under 15 rounds in a double stack, and these two both are, then I consider them both subcompact. However, the frame size and the slide size do differ just a little bit, so I'll talk about that as well. So let's real quick talk about some of the size differences between the two, which might help you lean towards one over the other if you're looking for a concealed carry option. So let's compare these two guys, and first and foremost, of course, let's just check, make sure that they're empty, and the Smith & Wesson is, as is the Glock, and they will both remain so throughout this video. So as we put these two together, I'm going to try and line them up as best I can back to back. The Glock overall length is 6.29 inches versus the Smith & Wesson, which is 6.7 inches. So not a lot of difference, but a little bit of difference in length, if length means anything to you. From a height standpoint, the Glock stands at 4.17 inches tall, and I will go ahead and throw a couple of flat base magazines in here. Both, of course, are empty. But the Smith is going to stand 4.3 inches, so just a hair taller. Now, one measurement that means a lot to folks that carry, of course, is the width. And the width on the Glock is 1.18 inches, and that remains true through all of the 9mm and 40 caliber Glocks there, 1.18 inches, versus the width on the Smith, 1.2 inches. So not a lot of difference between the two, but just a little bit. So the size, they are close, but they are not exactly alike. Now, the Smith, again, falling in between the Glock 26 and the Glock 19. Just a super fast comparison. I'm not going to wheel in the specs on the Glock 19 or anything like that. I've done that in a previous video. However, how they stack up. So the Smith truly does fall right in between these three guns here. So a little bit of an oddball in that sense, but pretty close. So again, I consider the 26 and the 9C very similar to each other. Now, how else are they similar and how else are they different? So let's just talk a little bit about, very quickly, the triggers on both of them. So for Glock, those of you who are fans of Glock know that Glock triggers are extremely similar to each other, unless you start tweaking them, doing a little bit of work on them. This one does have a ghost edge connector in it, and it's been polished, but otherwise it is a stock trigger. So with Glock triggers, we've got a smooth uptake, just a little bit of air in there, not a lot, and then we hit a pretty defined wall, and a very crisp, very smooth break, very tactile. I really like Glock triggers. I think they're very consistent. And this is going to come in right around 5.5 pounds there, which is pretty ideal for a Glock trigger in my opinion, at least from a concealed carry standpoint. And then we've got, again, a very audible and tactile reset. There is a tiny bit of take up after the reset, but not a lot. And then our break again, and our reset. Now the Glock trigger, of course, is going to have, it's the Glock safe action trigger, and it's got the little safety dingus right here that does have to be depressed to make the trigger work. Now the Smith, going to be a little bit different here. The Smith has the hinged design, so you do have to engage that hinge which will then make the bar behind the trigger go into the trigger itself so it can be fully depressed. So this one does have apex internals, so it's a great trigger. It is a very good trigger, and it's a little bit lighter than the Glock, but there's a little bit more take up there. No grit, which is really nice. Some Smiths have that grit. But take up, and we've got a break, and we've got a reset. Not as audible or tactile of a reset, but it's good enough. It's good enough. So there's our break and our reset. This trigger is probably going to come in a little bit closer to 5 pounds, maybe a little bit less than that. Those apex internals really do make a difference there. As far as sights go, a big thing with me on Glocks is always to replace the sights, and I've gone with Meprolite night sights on the Glock, all steel. I really like. The one thing that these don't have is a really defined ledge. There's a little bit of one, but it's not very defined to do one-handed manipulations. But I do like these sights quite a bit. They're easy to pick up in the day, and they also glow very brightly at night. Versus the Smith is going to be all steel right out of the box. They aren't polymer or anything like that, so you don't really have to change them out. And these are going to be a Novak style with a ledge right here, which is very nice. And they are a 3-dot setup, and so they're really good to go right out of the box, unless you really want night sights or fiber optics, something like that. But a good value there. You don't need to change out the sights versus the extra 80, 100 or so you need to spend on the Glock for the sights. But both are doable for sure, especially once you change out the sights on your Glock, if that's what you want to do rather than the polymer. So in terms of ease of maintenance, how easy are they to maintain? I'll go ahead and strip them down, but I'm not going to talk very much about that. You've seen that on other videos, and you can check out how to take those apart and really talk about the internals on my other videos if you'd like. But both are easy to do. With the Glock, you do have to depress the trigger. And once you do, I just wrap my hand around the back of it and pull just a little bit. And you depress your takedown lever, which is right here. Once you do, the Glock comes apart. And it comes apart in its 4 standard parts here. We've got our guide rod and spring, which is polymer. We've got our barrel, slide, and frame. And that's all there is to it. Now for the Smith disassembly, it is a little bit different. And if I can actually make this work, it's a little chilly down here today. So to take this apart, you do have to lock the slide open. And one advantage to the Smith, if this means or is important to you, there's a little bar back here that you can pull down with a tool. Yes, I'm using a Glock tool. Don't tell Smith & Wesson. But once you do and you take that bar down, and I'll show it to you a little bit better here in a moment, you will flip down your takedown lever. And then you're good to go. Again, you don't have to depress the trigger. So there's the little bar. I'll get my pointer here again. Little bar here that you can press down. Now, if you don't have a tool to take that down, and I wouldn't suggest trying to get to it with your finger, you can pull the trigger. It is possible to pull the trigger and take it apart. So in a pinch, you can do that. But then you've got your guide rod. This is not a dual spring assembly like the Glock. This is single flat spring, and it is steel. So if steel means something to you, then the Smith would have a little bit of an advantage there. But otherwise, you've got your barrel and your slide. Not a lot to it. They both have the same components. Both are essentially the same ease of maintenance, that sort of thing. If you want to take the gun down even further to start switching out parts or deeper cleaning or anything like that, I would give the edge to the Glock. I'm not going to do that in this video. I may in some video in the future. But the Smith, you can definitely take it apart. It just takes a little longer, an extra tool or two perhaps to get those roll pins out, that sort of thing. So not terribly complicated, but a little bit. Okay, so we're back, and the guns are put back together. I chose to go ahead and do that off camera just to save a little bit of time. But I would like to compare the shooting of these. And so let's go to some shooting, take a look at how these do at the range. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that range footage. So what do I think about both of these from a shooting perspective? In all transparency, I've put a lot more rounds through the Glock 26. I've had this particular 26 for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I'm sure I've got a couple of thousand rounds through it at this point. So I'm very used to shooting it, and it's very reminiscent of the Glock 19 in form and function. Biggest difference being a shorter grip, but otherwise the grip structure is the same. So it feels good in my hand. I'm just used to shooting Glocks, and especially the Glock 19 and 26. So I really enjoy shooting it. It was a pretty good day for the Glock 26 on the range. Shot it pretty well that day, or at least for my standards. I'm not a precision shooter, obviously, but it did really well. The Smith, I do enjoy shooting. It's got a good trigger. I don't shoot it quite as well. Part of that is I don't have as much experience with it. I may have about 500 rounds through it. But I've got a couple of the other Smiths, if you've watched any of my other videos. And so I've got some experience with those. But I would have to give the edge to the Glock, because I think their shooting characteristics are very similar. And from a size standpoint, I think the Glock gets a little bit of an advantage because it is just a little bit smaller all the way around, and that means a lot to me from a carry standpoint. And if they shoot very similar, and I can have a slightly smaller package in one, then I'm going to lean towards that. I think Glock reliability is it's hard to argue with. I suppose you could call me a little bit of a Glock fanboy. But that's for a good reason. They're good guns. They're not necessarily the prettiest guns out there unless you start really tricking them out, but they work very well. I'm used to them. So again, edge to the Glock a little bit from a shooting standpoint, but they both shoot well. Now, as far as aftermarket parts and that sort of thing, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I do. There's one pretty important thing to me, and both of these have this characteristic which is really nice, and it's their magazine compatibility. So what I mean by that is with the Smith, it's going to come with a 12-round steel flat base magazine, which is great. It also does come with an extended grip magazine. Now it's still 12 rounds, so you're not getting any extra rounds there. You're getting a little bit more grip there. So that is nice. It does add to a little bit of comfort if you don't like shooting with your pinky hanging off the gun. It doesn't bother me, but to some they really want that extra grip right there. Now with the Smiths, and I do have a full-size magazine here. This is a 17-round magazine from the full-size or the Pro. It does work in this gun, which is really nice. So if you want to carry maybe the flat or the extra finger grip magazine and then carry a larger magazine as a backup, if you choose to carry this, you can do so. It's really nice. Now Glock, basically the same idea. The Glock is going to come with 3 10-round magazines, and they're all flat-based, or at least that was my experience with this gun. So you've got your flat-based magazine and 2 others. However, what I've done here is I took another 10-round magazine. These are all 10-round magazines. I took one and I added the Glock plus 2 to this, so it does add a little bit more grip, which is kind of nice. It's extremely comfortable. I really like the way they did this, and you can add 2 rounds to it, so it does turn it into a 12-round magazine. So that to me, I think this is perfectly fine as a backup. However, if you want to go a step further, now this is a Glock 19 magazine, this is a 15-round magazine, and the story would be exactly the same with the 17-round magazine from the Glock 17 or 34. This will also go in here, and this does have a plus 2 as well. However, if you really want to go extreme on the Glock, this is the 33-round magazine here, and yes, it does work. I've shot this at the range several times. It's quite a rig right there, isn't it? It does work just fine. Do not treat it as a grip. You'll see that this one definitely does have some more wiggle to it, and I think it really would affect reliability. Again, I have not experienced that with this, but I'm really careful not to treat it as a grip. But you can definitely carry around some extra firepower if you want to. I'm not sure where you'd put this, but you know, if you can figure it out, more power to you. So it's really nice that both of these guns have some different magazine options. The magazines are a little bit cheaper from the Glock than the Smith, so a little bit of an advantage from a Glock standpoint. They're both plentiful. I'd say the Glock magazines are maybe a little bit more plentiful. Now the overall cost for the guns, I'd say the Smith does win out a little bit. You can generally get a 9C, depending on where you are here in Kansas, you'd be looking anywhere from $450 to maybe $500 for this, but you do get the steel sights on that, so that's a little bit of a value. However, you only get 2 magazines with it. Versus the Gen 4 Glock 26, I'm going to say it's going to be more 5 1/4, 550, maybe a little bit more depending on where you go. You get 3 magazines with it, but you do need to change the sights out if that's something that's really important to you. So you'd be looking at an extra 80, 100, and so on and so forth. Your mileage may vary there as far as value goes. But both will last. They're both very durable, very rugged guns, good quality construction. Again, I would probably give the edge to the Glock a little bit, even though you have to spend a little bit more. There's some great value in that, especially from a magazine compatibility standpoint. And one last thing, holsters. There are certainly plentiful holsters for both of these, a variety of options. Those of you who've watched my videos, I tend to lean towards Vetter holsters. I really like the Vetter inside the waistband, very basic, but it does the job for me, and I do carry the 26 quite often. In all transparency, I do not carry the 9C. I haven't decided whether this is going to be a permanent resident here or if this is more for the video purposes and just to try it out. So I haven't invested in any holsters or anything like that. But again, plenty of options out there. So what do I think of overall for these two guns? Well, I'll tell you, they're both great guns. There's nothing wrong with either one of them. You may lean towards one or the other just because you're a fan of the brand or have more experience with one or the other. That's me to an extent. I have a lot of experience with Glocks. I love my Glocks and certainly have a lot of pride with the Glocks that I have in my collection, and have spent a lot of time with the Glocks, including this one, the 26. So I would lean towards the 26, just have more experience. Plus, I think it has the advantage from a size standpoint. You might be dropping a couple of rounds if you're going with a flat magazine, but if you're carrying a backup of some sort or another that's 15 rounds, 17 rounds, or maybe 33 rounds, you've got a lot of options there. So I give the edge to the Glock. It's just my personal opinion. Again, both great guns. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully I've kept it a little bit shorter. That's the plan anyway. But thanks for joining me. I hope you'll leave some comments, like, subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything. And again, thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you later. Thanks.